it's the only art that I know that a 40-year-old can play with a 6-year-old, a 13-year-old can play with a 25-year-old. Anybody finds something they love there. Some people go for the community, some people go for the music, some people go for the physical fitness, some people go for the acrobatics, the flexibility, learning musical instruments, learning about the history, learning the language. I, for example, learned Portuguese thanks mostly to capoeira and got in love with the Afro-Brazilian culture thanks to capoeira.
Another episode of the Speak Real podcast, sharing one-on-one conversations. We believe that storytelling is the best way to empower youth and give them the platform to find their voices.
Presented by YouthSpeak. Youth experience, youth voice, youth empowered.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Speak Real podcast. I'm your host, Carson. I am a facilitator and speaker with YouthSpeak. I'm also the host of the IG Lives and podcast, and here we are. I'm here today with Vadim. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Correct. Very nice.
Did it.
Vadim or Fafushu. In capoeira, we have nicknames, as we call them, apelido, which essentially becomes your second name after a while. So I even know I'm called more Fafushu than I'm Vadim, honestly. But yeah.
All right, let's know. Yeah. So before we jump in with all the questions and all that, we want to thank our partner TD for helping us support our content here. Let's jump into it. The audience might not know what capoeira is. I do, since I kind of grew up with martial arts in my life. So
Wow.
yeah, we can talk about that throughout.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you explain to the audience what capoeira is?
Of course. So capoeira is a Brazilian art form that combines elements of dance, music, martial arts, and acrobatics. In my eyes, capoeira is the most complete and beautiful sport and art form in the world. It's a martial art, but it's also dance. It is music. It is songs. It's learning how to play the instrument, balance, movement, rhythm, coordination, strength training, cardio training, samba, maculelé. So it's a little bit of everything. Many actual Brazilian dances had their roots in capoeira. It's not just a physical movement or training routine. It's something that trains your mind. It nourishes your soul. And in capoeira, we don't say capoeira fight. There are some schools that put an emphasis on the more martial arts and self-defense aspect. In capoeira, most capoeira schools, organizations say capoeira game or capoeira jogo. Yeah, because the goal is not to fight each other necessarily. It's to play. That's why the name game kind of that's why the term game is what's used more often in capoeira. We rarely use the term fight or hurting someone. Actually, capoeira in 2014, the UNESCO granted the special protected status to capoeira as an intangible cultural heritage, making capoeira, as far as I know, the only martial art in the world to be recognized as such.
Wow, I did not know that. A high honor. And
yes,
I've heard of this about capoeira quite a bit, where it's not necessarily a fighting martial art, where it's also more of an art form, and it kind of made me think of like Tai Chi when I first heard that. Tai Chi is technically a martial art, but most people consider it like, oh, it's just like you're moving your hands and you're doing it. Yeah.
We hear that quite a bit about capoeira as well. It's actually one of there are some misconception as well, depending on who you ask, because capoeira combines all these elements, right? And this is actually part of the magic of capoeira, because this is why till today, like I said, I believe it's the most complete sport art from the world, because you have people from it's the only art that I know that a 40-year-old can play with a 6-year-old, a 13-year-old can play with a 25-year-old. Anybody finds something they love there. Some people go for the community, some people go for the music, some people go for the physical fitness, some people go for the acrobatics, the flexibility, learning musical instruments, learning about the history, learning the language. I, for example, learned Portuguese thanks mostly to capoeira and got in love with the Afro-Brazilian culture thanks to capoeira. And this is why it makes capoeira one of the many things that make capoeira so special, because everybody finds something they connect to over there. If somebody wants to learn martial art, and they choose that aspect, and they sometimes go further into that. Same thing with schools. There are some schools that put an emphasis on the more traditional capoeira, which is capoeira Angola, which is a slower, more a chess game style. And some groups put an emphasis on the martial arts, and groups put emphasis on a little bit of everything, which is what our school does. But in the end, because like any art form, it changes and adapts and really evolves as time progresses, and depending where it's being taught as well. Not in every country you'll be teaching capoeira the same way, because not every country has the same culture, the same people.
Yeah,
Right?
it makes
Everybody it
sense
is.
that the culture kind of like plays a role and people kind of do different things. I mean, I learned like mainly Hapkido and Aikido based
Mm-hmm.
martial arts, and I was under a few different senseis, and they taught very differently, and I learned very different
Yeah.
things. So, um,
Yeah.
I can definitely understand that from the perspective of someone who did grow up doing martial arts, how that can really, that can really differ based off what school you go to, which sensei you're
Mm-hmm.
under, for sure.
Yeah. There's different philosophies. There's different, well, each teacher has their own personal background, their own personal twist or spice, so to speak, that they add to any art. This is why one of the beautiful things about art, it constantly develops and changes. Even capoeira went through different stages over the last 400 and something years, ever since the first roots of capoeira began.
Wow. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. How did I want to know how you specifically became involved in the world of capoeira? Like what got you into this martial art in particular?
That's a great question. So, I was about 12 and a half maybe, and I did a different sport before. I think I did swimming for a couple of years, and I wanted to try something new. At the time, capoeira was relatively known where I grew up, and it was a friend of a family, actually. I think it was my mother's friend's son who did something called capu something. I couldn't even pronounce it in the beginning. Actually, it took me 3 months to remember how to say capoeira because it was not a familiar word. I knew the word cappuccino is actually, that's how I made the association, and that's how I was able to remember.
That's right,
But
Victorious cappuccino, capoeira, that's how you say it.
it's already 50% of the word, so it saves the other part. I remember that I was recommended the school that was in the city where I grew up at the time, and I actually even got I got a shirt as a gift from the family friend that went there. And I remember coming to the first class, and before class, remember seeing some kids doing flips and practicing some acrobatic moves. And obviously, as a 13-year-old, it got my attention. And I remember doing the first class, and after the first class, I remember running to my dad, saying, "Dad, I want this! I want this!" Something hooked me about it. And I think the first year that I did capoeira was mostly for the acrobatics, like many other kids in my age,
Mhm.
at my age at that time. And I think after about 2 years, I started becoming much more loving the different aspects of capoeira, and from the community, and the music, and the people, and the personal, let's say, the personal development that it helped me go through. And since then, I knew pretty much within the first year and a half, 2 years, that I wanted to do capoeira for the rest of my life, regardless of what context and what format. I knew that I want capoeira to be in my life forever.
Wow, that is really cool. And it is very interesting how you specifically got into it because of the acrobatics. And I'm sure that for other people there are other draws to it. I remember going with someone once to their first capoeira, like just a class, just to kind of like look at it, see what's going on.
Oh
And I
yeah.
was like, there's a lot happening here that I'm not used to. But I was so intrigued by it, and I was like, "Wow, there must be like so much intensity with training and everything just based off that class alone." Um,
Mhm.
that was really the first thing I got was like from capoeira, and like everything was how much training really goes into it.
But you also, as somebody who did martial arts or has a martial arts background,
Yeah,
you were able also to comprehend probably a lot more than most people, because for a lot of
yeah,
people, we just they see a capoeira, which says a reflection. What goes out in capoeira is a reflection of what's going on inside. Yeah,
hmm,
even as a teenager, you go in, and what attracts you the most is acrobatics. Well, there's something in your psyche, or in your inner development, that kind of pushes you that way. Because some people go in and start capoeira at 12. I still have, for example, parents that send me messages that their parents, the kids who are 9 or 10, and say, "Listen, my child loves dance, or my child loves music, or my child loves the flips," or and even then you can really see kind of the personal development and that's why everybody finds themselves at 9, 10, 11. Kids already have their personalities, already things that attract them, they like, they don't like. They know already. You don't have to, steer them one direction or the other. And it's also, I find that it's also a lot of times what speaks to kids when they start capoeira, and it's one of the beautiful things because capoeira attracts everybody. We say the capoeira is for everyone,
Yeah.
and everybody finds something that connects to them, that speaks to them, that they love, and from there it develops to other things. This is why I say a lot of times you can see a child or a person's inner world or inner development through the capoeira roda, which is a circle of capoeira where we usually play capoeira. Yeah, the way they
Oh,
act, if they respond, if they tend to respond quickly, if they tend to not think before they do something, it will show in the capoeira game. If they love music more, then you see when they're singing versus when they're playing, there's a different energy, there's a different expression on their face, right?
yeah. That's very interesting. Because, like, when it comes to the martial arts that I learned growing up, like that kind of expanded a bit with how you mentioned, you learned Portuguese through capoeira. Like I learned very minimal Japanese for things as well, but that was pretty much the extent of it. Or
Hmm.
um, like there's some things that were very similar, but I feel like there's a lot of broadness with capoeira that I don't see with other martial arts. You'd mentioned something else too, where you said, you probably noticed a lot of things with the martial arts when you went to see the capoeira class. And the first thing that I noticed, I was like, oh, they also do funny warm-ups as well. Because I think that a lot of people who are in martial arts don't realize how hilarious looking some of the martial art warm-ups are. Like, I have one where we're just, like, rolling on the ground looking like babies. And
Yep, yep,
the one
yep,
I saw
yep.
was everyone just, like, almost crawling on the ground. I was like, "Oh, so this is, like, common."
Yeah, capoeira is interesting in that sense, because I find that anybody who does capoeira and goes to other types of martial arts, movement, dance, whatever they choose to do with their body, uh, almost always, actually no, always, that I've heard of, at least when I've spoken to these people, they find that, wow, capoeira helped me when I brought it into modern dance. Capoeira helped me when I went to do salsa. Capoeira helped me when I did karate. Capoeira helped me BJJ and capoeira go hand in hand,
They
actually,
really
very
do,
well,
I've
because
noticed.
everybody who does BJJ, everybody does capoeira. If you even ever seen the UFC fights, anybody who respects themselves as a fighter, especially Brazilians or people that did grappling, which is pretty much a necessity whenever you're working with MMA, have done or trained for a certain period of time in capoeira, or learned at least the basic elements. From Anderson Silva to Conor McGregor, who's actually used to train, his movement coach was Ido Portal. Ido Portal is a very well-known movement coach who actually I grew up watching him doing capoeira as a child back in Israel.
Wow.
That's where I watched him and his team and his students doing capoeira back then.
Whoa.
And it was very interesting. Then a few years later, he became one of the coaches of, at the time, Conor McGregor. So it
Mhm.
just goes to show how much it adds another layer to your movement, to your understanding of martial arts, dance, and because it's all connected, right? In the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's all movement that develops here and here.
For anyone who doesn't know, BJJ stands for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Thank you. Yes. We should have said that in the beginning, just to be clear.
I might as well be like the little map keyboard or what's it called? The map key or whatever they call it when
Yeah,
you're looking at a map.
yeah, might be a bit presumptuous because we done martial arts, so anybody who does
Yeah,
movement or martial arts knows what BJJ is. But yeah, BJJ,
yeah.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Are you able to tell us about the origin of this art form, like where it kind of started, the history of it?
I'll try not to go too much into detail because capoeira history dates back hundreds and hundreds of years. So capoeira began around the 16th century, mostly by African slaves who were brought in from Africa, mainly from Angola, but from other parts of Africa as well. They were brought to Brazil by the Portuguese colonists at the time, because Brazil used to be a colony of Portugal, I think, until the early 19th century. The main trade in Brazil at the time under the Portuguese was sugarcane production and tobacco as well, and depended mostly on the labor of slaves. So these slaves were kept in very inhumane condition. They were forced to work, 7 days a week in the beginning, and suffered really bad physical punishment and for any kind of small behaviors. Actually, many of these African slaves didn't make it to Brazil because of the inhumane conditions they were kept in the boats that brought them, or the ships better that brought them in. They stayed weeks on end, in the belly of the ship, nowhere to use the washroom, nothing like that. So really, really terrible conditions. And even though that slaves were numbered, but they were outnumbering the colonists, rebellions were very rare because of their lack of weapons, the harsh colonial rule. Obviously, many different slaves came from different African cultures. They don't all have a knowledge about the land, or the languages were different. And all of this usually discouraged the idea of a rebellion. So in this environment, essentially, capoeira was born as a simple method of survival. Yeah. It was a tool in which an escaped slave was able to survive in a hostile unknown land, and later on also use it as a tool to escape or fight against the masters. So what would happen is that the slaves were able to escape. They were usually chased by the capitães do mato, which was the armed and mounted colonial agents. I guess they were charged with finding all the captured slaves. And soon after, several groups of escaping slaves would, once they escaped, they would gather and establish quilombos, which would be essentially primitive settlements in the far and very hard to settle, parts of the jungle, because back there Brazil was even more jungle than what it is today. And some of these quilombos, these slave settlements, freed slave settlements, would grow into enormous size, becoming essentially independent multi-ethnic states. And since everyday life in Colombo offered a little bit more freedom and opportunity to revive some of these traditional cultures, origin villages or countries where they came from in Africa, capoeira started developing under those conditions. And essentially, because these quilombos were constantly threatened by the capitães do mato, capoeira developed even more so as a martial arts and a survival tool that was also focused on war. Actually, the biggest quilombo, the Quilombo dos Palmares, was consisted of many villages, which lasted for over a century. And I think they resisted like around something like 24 smaller attacks and 18 big colonial invasions. And there's actually many stories in capoeira about some of the fighters that defended these quilombos and helped to free slaves and so forth. And obviously, throughout the hundreds of years, capoeira as any art form started, taking different elements from different martial arts. Capoeira actually changed quite a bit from what it was hundreds of years ago until what it is today. And then actually in the end of the 19th century, I think, when slavery was abolished in Brazil, I think it was 1888, many of the freed slaves, they suddenly became free, so to speak, but without any means to support themselves. No money, no food, no shelter. So many of them either became criminals, robbers, started forming gangs, or working as essentially bodyguards and thugs for hire, so to speak, for some crime lords, because back then life was a bit harder, even harder than it is today in Brazil. So capoeira actually became illegal for a while, and I think it was in 1932 that a very famous capoeira master by the name of Mestre Bimba, who actually saw what's going on with capoeira, it became a little bit more playful. It felt like capoeira was losing a little bit of its martial arts aspect and more of its tradition. So he is actually the first capoeira teacher to bring capoeira into the academy. He developed a belt system. He developed a uniform. He made capoeira look a little bit more, so to speak, legit. Especially in a more modern, growing Brazilian society, so to speak. And he was getting a lot of people from from higher socioeconomic classes, which obviously was able to get him a better exposure. In the beginning, he didn't call his school capoeira, didn't use the name capoeira because it was not really legal to do so. He called it luta regional baiana, which means the regional fighting style of Bahia. But shortly after, he got more exposure, and I think it was in the late the 30s that capoeira became legalized or became decriminalized, and then from there it just started growing exponentially. So a lot of capoeira that we play today is actually owed to Mestre Bimba. He helped make capoeira a little bit more into the format of what many capoeira schools have today. But the capoeira history is super, super, super rich and diverse. There's actually a lot of information we don't know. So I might perhaps I'm wrong with some details, because much of the information about capoeira was passed from father to son, from teacher to student, because especially after the abolition of slavery, a lot of the records were destroyed.
Yeah.
So to cover up a lot of terrible things that happened. So many things, every time somebody tells a story to their student or to their son or to their daughter, to whatever, or to their child, there's some information there's been maybe changed, lost, missing,
Mm-hmm. It's that historical game of telephone for sure.
Yep. From the first to the 10th person, there's only maybe 10% of truth.
Yeah, I knew some of that information, particularly pertaining to how it was illegal for a time. I didn't realize that it was so connected to colonialism. It kind of reminded me a bit of blues music in that way, where it was kind of as a means of survival, but for very different reasons. Capoeira was definitely more for survival, to fight against the system, and then blues was just to like kind of cope with it. I
Yeah,
think that's a
yeah.
very interesting contrast I was making while you were discussing this, that I felt like sharing.
You're absolutely right. Even before then, even in the 16th and 17th century, when slavery was still obviously everywhere there, the slaves in the beginning, the slaves had to work 7 days a week.
Yeah.
But when the Portuguese colonists realized that they need to have it at least 1 day a week off, because they were dying.
Yeah.
They were just dying. They were not dying because of necessarily exhaustion, but they were dying just because they were burned out, and because they're when you work 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, you don't really have a desire to live. But then they give them 1 day a week, and for a lot of them, that 1 day a week was the ability to practice some of their folkloric dances and traditions, and just have a little bit of an outlet, and in the midst of that, many aspects of capoeira developed as well.
That's really, really interesting, and there's a lot to go into there, but I'm
We're
curious.
limited on time.
Yes, because we definitely are. I'm curious. You were just describing how it was, important for people to have that, like, kind of that day to really just like express themselves and to have a release. In what ways has capoeira contributed to your mental well-being?
Where do I start? Um, More ways that I can count. I guess the fastest way to summarize it is capoeira literally saved my life. As I was going, as many teenagers and children go through, difficult times in their teens, where you're trying to figure out who you are, what you love, what interests you. I was going for a very hard time as a child, as a teenager, especially, with many personal, emotional, social, and physical challenges at the time. Capoeira gave me focus, gave me resilience, self-confidence, stronger mind, and stronger spirit and body. And I think the biggest thing that I would say capoeira teaches you, or taught me at least, is how to handle problem and challenges and constantly improve yourself in any way you can. Because as I mentioned before, the capoeira game and the roda is very often a reflection of some of the problems and challenges and difficulties that we ourselves are struggling with our inside world. And the result, it manifests itself into the game that we see outside. And capoeira teaches us how to overcome those and learn the lessons from this experience. I know from my experience, I can say till today that my teacher and my master helped me see a lot of the things that I myself can improve on. It's the biggest tool for self-improvement and self-development that we can have, really.
I'm glad that capoeira has been that for you. I think that can be very, it can be hard when there's not that outlet for people. And, I definitely found that sometimes, there was a few certain instances where I was like, okay, I'm glad I have this with martial arts because it was really helpful at the time. But yeah, like that's really great to hear that that was something that you were able to have, especially with your master. I'm curious, do you call them your master in capoeira, or is it sensei, or?
Well, again, the different schools might have different philosophy on it. I
Right.
always believe that the only time you have to refer to somebody by their title, so to speak, or their belt, whatever rank, is when they're teaching in class.
Yeah.
Yes, because your teacher becomes your teacher, your master, either one. But the reason you call it your master, mestre in Portuguese also refers to a teacher,
Yeah.
because your teacher in many ways becomes your life guide almost. Yeah, a lot of the things that you don't notice in yourself, your teacher is able to help you realize.
Mhm.
Many students also throughout times they choose different teachers, and in the end of the day, especially in capoeira, and I think in any martial artist or mover who respects themselves, you don't always learn from just one person.
True.
You have the one guide or your one teacher who you choose to be your main point of reference. But even my teacher, for example, he learned from many teachers, even though he has, his master, who is a master of our school. We'll say master just because it's the the rank, but he had his teacher who was obviously his teacher for many years, but at one point they became colleagues and they learned from each other. And this is one of the things I think is very special in capoeira. You constantly learn. I learn from my students every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is part of what makes capoeira special, because it constantly develops and changes. So everybody has something that they can bring into capoeira. You bring an idea on the table, and if you see, okay, wow, this can really better a community, this can really better capoeira, then adapt. Because this is what happened with capoeira for hundreds of years. Capoeira we play today was very different 100 years or 200 years ago.
Mhm.
And the capoeira we play today is thanks to the contributions that many people, from students to more advanced students to masters to people of all levels, contributed and brought into capoeira, including many of the dances that were kind of born from capoeira, like maculelé or samba. These are very, very famous, well-known Brazilian dances to today, and practice in capoeira as well as in Brazilian culture in general.
That's really great. And it is very similar with the martial arts I've been in, where a lot of my teachers, kind of go back all the way back up to one person, or, you're just kind of walking down the street and suddenly you're like, you meet someone who's like worked under your teacher and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a whole thing. But
Yeah.
you mentioned other students, and I wanted to know, do you have a student impact story you would like to share or you're willing to share?
Wow, more than I can count. I'm very proud to say the more that I can count. It's from the look in a student's eyes when they succeed a move. This light in their eyes, the spark where they finally suddenly feel empowered. They suddenly start believing themselves more because they succeeded something. From the email that I get after, because we have yearly events that run throughout the year as part of the ongoing training and teaching of our students, where we bring different teachers that contribute some of their philosophy and teach special workshops. The emails that I get after an event where a mother or father of a 6-year-old child, says, wow, my child, he can't stop talking about capoeira now. He's not want to sleep. He practices all day. Or no, I remember a few years back, I had a mother that wrote me, oh, my my son decided that after this event, after this batizado, which is our belt ceremony, he wants to he wants to train at least until this belt. He's not going to stop. Actually, this child till today trains more than any other student in my
Wow.
teens class. He signs up to every event, right? So just being able to see what capoeira helps how capoeira helps other people, and how it helps them develop and grow the same way it did for me. There's no bigger blessing than this in the world. Being able to do something that betters the world and helps people become healthier, stronger, especially in today's age where we're constantly bombarded by screens and just all these regular dopamine hits and all these issues that I know about you, but I as a teenager didn't see it as much, from all the issues with concentration. I didn't even know what that is back then, because I had a bit of a different childhood, but a lot of the children nowadays are going through different experiences, unfortunately, as we get more technologically advanced, so to speak.
Yeah, I know for me, being uh someone who was born when I was born, um, I had a very interesting kind of progression with that. I kind of saw how that turn of the century and how it
Yeah.
really played a role, because like I'm young enough to remember that kind of, but old enough to be like, wait a minute. So it's a kind of an interesting balance there for me to see like how much that's changed in just with my time on Earth. It's kind of wild to look back on that and see the changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can probably see this right in the middle between, because me, I'm, I guess, a little bit more millennial in my early mid 30s. So I had my first phone when I was 13, 14. I had those Nokia snake phones, I was getting
Yeah.
so excited. I had a limited amount of messages. I was introduced to Facebook when I was 17 and a half. So it was a bit different. I find that with every couple generations, every couple years, they get exposed to these things so much sooner.
Mhm.
And you can tell how it's a double-edged sword in the way that it affects our
Definitely.
mind.
Definitely. I'm curious with youth nowadays. Um, do you have any advice for them in who are, for youth who are interested in getting involved in capoeira?
I believe that any environment where a child of any age, especially youth, feels safe, loved, welcome, empowered, encouraged, is an environment where they can flourish and grow up stronger, healthier, more compassionate, confident human beings who can help others grow the same way. Because I find that this is one of the things that we need more of nowadays. People that are compassionate, that are helping their fellow human beings.
Mhm.
Me as so I believe that after trying experiencing many different ways of exercise of expression, I can honestly say there's nothing better in the world than capoeira, because it gives everybody what they need. They
Mhm.
don't always realize it at the time, but once they do it for enough time, they start feeling that. Because everybody, even in class, I'll ask sometimes, okay, so what did you take from class? Okay, what did you like? And very often, each one of them will say something else based on their personal experience, based on what they feel they need, based on what they feel they love, based on what they feel they're good at. So my advice would be try capoeira today. Just might be just the thing to change your life, like it did mine. And as a result, I was blessed and be able to do the same thing and help so many other people to also improve and better life through capoeira till today. I found this is my mission as far as I see it. Even if I don't have any limbs, God forbid, there's anything happens, I'm gonna do capoeira till the day I die.
Yeah, wow, that's a really great that's just a really great way of like, highlighting that. And I'm actually gonna like switch questions based off your answer there.
Of
I'm gonna
course.
ask now, what are some things that you offer at the Canadian Center for Capoeira and where can people get more info?
We currently offer regular classes at their two locations in Toronto, one in North York and one in the Forest Hill area. We offer regular group classes for kids, which would be usually the ages of 5 to 9, teens, which would be 10 to 16, and adults would be 16 and up.
Mhm.
We have classes 4 days a week, and there's two locations. We also offer after school programs. We work at birthday parties, lots of private one-on-one classes, both for kids and adults, capoeira-based fitness group and individual classes. We do workshops, demonstrations, shows, and also it's a very, very, very great. My teacher is really good at this. Great team building tool for corporations and organizations of all sizes, especially nowadays where people I find are, whether they work through the screen or from home or hybrid or in cubicles. This is something that I think is very much needed. This is not just for kids, it's for everyone. So it's a great team building tool. And to find information about us, you can find on our website, which is tcc4c.com, like the Canadian Center for Capoeira. Or you can simply search Capoeira Toronto or Instagram or Google and Facebook or TikTok or X will be one of the first pages to pop up. It'll be the same logo as here, this one right here,
Oh, it's great.
yellow, black, yellow, black.
Yes.
And that's it. You also can contact us via email or phone call. And like I said, our classes they're perfect for all ages, for all fitness levels. And once you walk through the doors, as far as we're concerned, you're part of our family.
Wow, that's great. We will make sure to have the website link in the description for anyone who is interested in,
Thank you.
of course, this is what we do here. Um, so I have one last question for you before
Of
we
course.
wrap up here. So, do you have a favorite technique? And what would that technique be? Is there like a specific, is there a specific like combination of techniques that you like together? Is there a certain, activity you prefer when it comes to like training?
That's a great question. I wish I can give you a black and white answer. The truth is, just as capoeira, it it really depends. We say this a lot in our school. Yeah, it
Yeah.
depends, because just like in life, it depends. There's nothing is black and white. There's a lot of things that are gray in life. Yeah, a
Mhm.
lot of things. Some things are maybe universal as human beings, but a lot of things in life are gray because it depends on your personal point of view. Every time there's a capoeira game that has a connection, for me, there's not a specific acrobatic moves, because capoeira is so beautiful and so many mesmerizing and interesting moves that it's hard to choose just one.
Yeah.
But any type where there's a connection, and in the end of the day, every time I see a move or a game that ends in a smile or a hug, as far as I'm concerned, it's my favorite one.
Oh, that's
Because
so wholesome. I love that.
you create a friendship in capoeira. We actually have, lots of situations that I can speak for myself. But I've never met anyone. So I've never met someone before the game. So we're going to the capoeira roda, which is the circle where we play capoeira. If you ever watched a capoeira video, I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
And we don't know each other before. Maybe you'll say introduce yourself, but then you start a game usually with a cartwheel or an acrobatic move. And after the game, without saying a word, because we play a game that is not usually, there's no talking, obviously. And after the game, yeah, it's such a great game that just from there, you already know that you're friends forever. Don't have to
Yeah.
even say anything. Yeah, and from there, friendship, beautiful friendship starts. My teacher has this quote that it says, one of your goals in capoeira is to have a couch to crash on in every city in the world. And you do that for capoeira a lot of times. You go to events in different cities, and maybe there's somebody there who came from Germany or from Italy or from South America somewhere, from Central America. And then just from there, you already have, just by saying, hey, I'm capoeira, you're part of this family. You always have a home to stay somewhere. I actually was in Costa Rica a few weeks ago, and just by, being part of capoeira, I was able to be feeling very much welcome on my last day in Costa Rica, actually, in the local capoeira school in San Jose.
Wow, that's so cool. And also so wholesome. I love that. Because I also like I've gained friends from martial arts that I like, we might not
For
talk every
life.
day, but they're friends for life,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's such a true thing with like martial arts in general, but like also with capoeira. You find those chosen families in a way, and they can be a real support for people. So I love that. I think that's so wholesome and just such a great way to end off with our questions.
Yeah, it's the family you choose.
It really is. It really is the family you choose. Thank you so much for joining us, Vadim. I really appreciate it. I love hearing your experience. I think you have so many great stories. I wish I could ask you everything all day. Fortunately, we don't have that time. But thank you,
Podcast.
TD, for partnering with YouthSpeak for our podcasts. If you have any last messages for our audience.
So first of all, thank you to YouthSpeak. Thank you for Carson. Thank you for Natasha, everybody who was doing this amazing, beautiful initiative. I think this is something we're definitely missing more on the world. This is something that I hope will continue to grow, both your podcast and the entire idea of people who have actual experience in many things to share with the world, because this is something we need more in this today's world: is connection, is knowledge, is compassion, and love. In the end of the day, that's all all we crave is connection as human beings, and anything that promotes that will only helps us more as a society, as people, and hopefully as the human race, so to speak.
Oh,
Carson, it was a pleasure meeting you. Yeah?
it was a pleasure meeting you too. I love how poetic you ended it off with. It was chef's kiss, perfect.
Well, I wanted to share a little bit something personal of mine, and I feel this
Yeah.
is what I truly believe in. For me, capoeira is a tool for connecting us as human beings, because I think that this is something that we need very much more of in the world, because the thing that connects us, supposed to connect us the most, technology, is as a paradox, double-edged sword that essentially keeps us further apart than any other time in history, so to speak.
We will see you next time with a new episode of the Speak Real podcast. For You Speak, I'm Carson. Bye.
If you want to hear more stories, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like. To support more youth by youth led projects, visit us at youthspeak.ca, where you can donate and spread youth mental health awareness.
YouthSpeak Charity. Speak, inspire, change.